Thank you very much for inviting me. I'll jump right into the presentation because I've got quite a lot to cover. So I'd like to to begin. So I've modified the title a little bit between method and standard, and I'm struggling with the last word. It's either survival or sanity, and I hope I will make my case quite clear as we proceed. So let's start with just kind of defining the problem of why Markdown and why is everything the way I'm doing it, the way we are doing it in GitHub project and OpenITI project. So one of the things to consider is that we're, as many scholars doing DH actually now, saying that we are in the stage of DH 2.0. And one of the characteristics of DH 1.0 was that it was the period when a large digitization of projects have been funded and digital resources have been created. We as a field, I mean, Arabic and Islamic studies or Islamic studies more generally, we kind of miss that DH 1.0, and we still actually don't have resources that we need. So we are now at DH 2.0, where the focus shifted from resource creation to analysis. And again, but we, the field, we still haven't finished our stage. So on the other hand, there was a great number of digital libraries of Arabic texts that have been created in the past years, probably already a couple of decades. None of them are really suitable for forms of analysis that are expected at DH 2.0 stage. On top of that, we already have a truly massive amount of texts. So here I'm giving an example, kind of the numbers of 740 million words. That's what we have in OpenITI, only to count unique text, but the entire corpus runs into over 1.5 billion words. That's actually, that's probably the largest historical corpus that actually exists. I think the only other area that can compete with Arabic reading tradition is Chinese tradition. So again, we have a truly massive amount of texts. So just a few numbers here. OpenITI at the moment has, actually until very recent moment, had almost 4,800 unique texts, 700 million words, or tokens would be a better word to use here rather than words. 1.5 billion tokens if we're talking about all versions of texts that are included, because we often have different editions of the same text. So, and the release, if you want to, for example, if you want to download the entire corpus and use the release, that will be over 15 gigabytes of data on your hard drive. And if you actually want working folders, that runs almost to 30 gigabytes of text. So on November 29th, which was just recently, almost 360 new authors and over 1,000 unique texts have been added to our corpus. So we now actually effectively approaching 6,000 unique texts in the corpus. So again, the main problem is very, very pragmatic. How do we jump right into DH 2.0? Or in other words, how we jump from text to this kind of a analysis, summarizations, bird's eye views of the Arabic tradition and the data it contains. And by that I mean, okay, things like how different, here's a graph, for example, shows you how different early Islamic centers fared across time. So Medina, Basra, Kufa were very prominent in the beginning of the Islamic period, and then they very quickly disappear from the historical map of the Islamic world. This is based on Al-Dhahabi. How different regions were connected with each other, how different regions contributed to cultural production in the Islamic world, how many people were actually contributing to the cultural production, how many authors we had in the Islamic world over time, and how different regions contributed to cultural production over time. Things like how different texts are interconnected with each other, right? So for instance, Sebastian Moreau yesterday showed how you can look for the possible source if you have a quotation, right? So this graph shows how we can actually look for quotations shared between texts in general. We can construct a network and look at how texts that share the same connections form different clusters. And here in this example is particularly interesting that we can see how different texts coming from different legal traditions, and you can see here Hanbali, Hanafi, Maliki, Shafi texts, and a quite large cluster of Shia, 12 Shia fiqh of a Ja'fari school, forming a cluster because they cite each other. So again, pragmatic approach. What do we do? How we deal with this? The OpenITI mARkdown is actually a part of a kind of a bigger vision, and the idea is here: how do we have minimum intervention into our text to provide sufficient machine readability, facilitating maximum possibilities for further analysis? And mARkdown here is only a part of it. So mARkdown sort of takes care of text structure and analysis. CTS-like organization takes care of a corpus structure, and Arabic beta code is useful for metadata, again for speeding up, for simplifying the processes of creating metadata. So let's talk a little bit about all these issues. And here I would like to draw attention to this kind of principle, which is used in the business world called 80-20. Which essentially states that we spend 20% of our time to do 80% of our work, and then we spend 80% of our time to finish the remaining 20%. So that's that's one of the kind of things that I'm strongly considering with kind of pushing forward with this approach. So Arabic beta code. That's actually a very simple thing. It comes from classicists who developed a beta code to deal with to be able to transcribe Greek texts at the time when there was actually no support for Greek characters. Again, since I spent a lot of time with classicists, my position was at Tufts University, the Persis project, and then at Leipzig. In both cases, the projects were led by Gregory Crane. So I kind of appropriated that idea for the beta code. The idea is that again we use ASCII characters to transliterate Arabic. The main reason here is that when we produce metadata, we want the names of authors to be written in transliteration and in Arabic, right? In a standard approach, what happens is that you type the same thing twice, once in English or French or whatever language you're using in your research, and then in Arabic. So the beta code actually kind of takes care of this in a sense that, okay, here's an example that's actually a web implementation done by Peter Verkinderen, a member of our Kitab team, based on the beta code that I first developed. So essentially, it uses extra characters that can be automatically converted into transliteration and into Arabic script, as shown here. So Shamsuddin Abdurrahman al-Dhahabi becomes transliterated, and you can apply different transliteration schemas because again, transliterations used by Germans, by British, American, Russian, French Arabists, they differ, right? So we want to be able to convert into whatever schema we want to use. And in Arabic, so we can easily have fully vocalized Arabic, or we can easily strip the vowels from Arabic and just keep the consonants and long vowels. So that helps a lot in the production of metadata, because again, you only need to do a half of what you would be doing otherwise. Second thing is the CTS-like organization. It's another thing which is again taken from the classicists, and it's implemented in the corpus organization, in our corpus organization, which lives on GitHub, which allows people to benefit from it, because everything is openly available, and but also to contribute and add texts to the corpus, or improve the quality, and so on and so on. So again, this is just a few numbers about the title, about the content of the corpus, and the distribution of chronological distribution of text, which you can see, despite the corpus being so large, there's actually clearly strong focus on up until the Mamluk period, roughly, and then the number of texts goes down quite significantly, and that's something we, of course, very much interested in fixing, as well as expanding the corpus into areas which are not covered by the libraries, that online libraries that we used to build the corpus. And in this regard, I think you can watch Peter Verkinderen's presentation of Kitab and OpenITI, which is recorded in the same series. I think somebody can share the link, and then you'll find more details about the which libraries we use to construct the corpus. But I can answer that afterwards as well. So again, CTS is a canonical text services, which is a very interesting and robust way of organizing data, and again, it comes from classics. There's a particular implementation called Capitans, developed by Thibaut Claris, who was mentioned yesterday, I think, in Jean-Baptiste's presentation, and Bridget Almas, and it's a very robust API for managing actually TI XML texts. And since we're not using TI XML text, we have to do some modifications. The power of this CTS, of this canonical text services, is in how things are organized on your hard drive, and how the texts are organized inside them. So the hard drive organization it has this kind of a text groups and works and editions, and this kind of a tree structure allows you to accommodate any number of versions of texts. So in the way we implemented it, I should say, just in case in case I don't put the blame on other people, because that was largely my implementation of this, and all errors that exist there on me completely and entirely. But the idea is that each file is assigned a name which partially encodes metadata in it. Like here we have an example of 0748 Dhahabi. This first part is a unique identifier of the author. The second part is the book ID, Tariq Islam. The next part, 4, is a version ID. So this particular version comes from Shamila, and its internal ID is actually 35100. Then we have another part that specifies the language, and the next element could also specify a specific passage inside the book, or even a specific range of words. That depends on how you want to use it. So physically, how it's how you can actually see it is a specific organization, folder organization for the text that we have. So, for instance, the first part here, as you can see, highlighted with kind of the red frame. That's how the corpus is broken down into 25-year periods. And again, the main reason is that if we put it all in one repository, that will be a very large amount of data, and it will be very inconvenient to work. Again, as I said, the size of the corpus is already nearing to 30 gigabytes. So splitting it into 25-year periods helps a lot. So inside of each folder, and here we have an example of 750, we have subfolder data, which has then subfolders with the IDs of authors, and again you can see there's 0748 Dhabi, and which in its own turn has subfolders for each work. And inside each subfolder for each work, there are versions of the text. And here, there's a kind of a large variety, large number of different versions of the same text coming from different sources. JK comes from Jam al-Kabir. Schema comes from Schema that you can download online. Sham 30K comes from Schema with 30,000 texts in it, which is I'm not entirely sure who exactly put it together, but it's available on archive.org. And Shia is an indicator, is the ID for the Maktabat Shia, I believe. It's Shia Library Online, and so on and so on. Again, the entire structure online on GitHub, which is actually quite easy to use. You can learn how to use GitHub in just a couple of hours, but it may take a little longer to kind of internalize the philosophy and the concepts. So we have this repository called Barzakh, into which new text can be added, and then they will be automatically processed and added to built into the corpus and put into the places where they belong. Again, as I also mentioned, the corpus is published in releases and can be also downloaded from Zenodo, and you can cite it as a proper publication. So now OpenITI Markdown. So the third kind of a part of it. So Markdown itself is actually a system, a general system, which was developed first and foremost by John Gruber for simplifying work with HTML. I'll give you an example in just a bit. And the idea of Markdown is to be easy to read and easy to write, as easy to read and as easy to write as is feasible, although readability is emphasized above all. So here's an example. Markdown you can see on the right, and HTML you can see on the left. So HTML is the main standard in which all web pages are written. And you can see, for example, that's like the first line, this is hello world in HTML. And you can see that in HTML, it's wrapped into two tags, the opening tag, H1, and the closing tag, H1. While in Markdown, it's just a hashtag and an empty line that separates the header from the rest of the text. And as you can see, all other elements are simplified. They're very, very simple. You can learn Markdown again in half an hour and use it very effectively for academic writing, for instance. So that was the source of my inspiration again, because in the beginning when I just started working on this, on building the corpus and doing text analysis, I, of course, very, very seriously considered TI XML. You know, after studying their almost 1,000-page-long manual, I kind of realized that I will never finish my dissertation if I try to convert the history of Islam into TI XML first. I probably would have been still doing that if I chose that course of action. And one of the reasons, of course, is that this text is over 3 million words long, which is much longer than probably any XML files that you can, TI XML files that you can find in European languages. So what's exactly behind this OpenITI Markdown? So let me just kind of read it to make this main points. So it's a lightweight tagging schema that facilitates the conversion of raw text into machine actionable formats, as well as facilitates data collection and extraction. Two main issues prompted the development of the schema. First, we sought to avoid problems that one faces when paired symbols, such as angle brackets, left to right and right to left languages, and connected scripts occur in the same document, making even a simple editing task overly complicated. Second, a lightweight and easy-to-use tagging schema is of utmost necessity when one has to work with multi-volume text that make up the core of the Arabic written tradition. So, these were two main issues. And OpenITI Markdown offers an easy-to-use schema of structural tagging, which are only 3 to 6 symbols long per tag, and a limited number of tags for semantic patterns and entities. But in general, I would say that Markdown is not only for creating additions, it's more of, not more, but also is an exploratory research format. And I'll explain that as we go along. So I don't want to do that, but I kind of have to. I have to talk about OpenITI Markdown in comparison with TI. We had a presentation about TI, which is, however, was more focused on history of TI and the whole community around and everything else. So TI has lots of advantages. It's a long-standing standard maintained by a community of scholars. There's a whole series of XML technologies that got developed around it and can be efficiently used. There are plenty of existing frameworks for publishing TI text. So for instance, if you create your text, if you annotate it in TI, it can be plugged into one of those systems and it will be displayed based on that system. So that's a huge advantage. And it's also undeniably excellent archival format. What it is not, it's not an exploratory format, specifically because it's a standard. So if you want to do some kind of research, you want to try things, you want to experiment with things, TXML is quite heavy and unwieldy, especially when it comes to Arabic, especially when it comes to long Arabic texts. So the main issue about TI, and again, I'm kind of covering these issues right now, largely because of whenever I talk about Markdown, I run into the question is like, okay, well, wait, there is already TI XML, why are you reinventing the wheel? So the issue that I'm kind of running into most commonly when this conversation starts is actually not so much about TI XML itself as about the confusion that is kind of created about it. So many newcomers to DH, they enter DH field through their exposition, being exposed to TI. And for them, TI becomes is what DH is. And the most, I think, harming things here is that when they learn about TI as their kind of a main DH training, they do often confuse an implementation of a principle with the principle itself. So TI is, for them, TI is annotation. TI for them is machine readability. Although at the same time, it's just a method to provide annotations. It's a method to provide machine readability. And like with Markdown and HTML, the example that I shown you before, some lightweight counterpart to TI could be extremely beneficial for a number of reasons and for a number of purposes. So again, I don't know if this particular thing rings a bell. This was a Mac advertisement campaign when they believe they introduced their Intel Macs again in 2006 or something like this, and where they highlight the value of new Macs by comparing with the PC in different funny ways. So I'll run along with this, but my point is here that it's not necessarily an either-or approach, but rather it's about understanding when to use what, and in order to get the most benefit for yourself. Again, here's an example of the same text. One on the left is in TI XML, and one on the right is in Markdown. And simply on the amount on the same amount of screen, you have more Markdown text than you have in terms of XML. XML, again, if you're not familiar with that, it probably won't make too much of a kind of impact in terms of what I'm saying, but here, for example, the people who were generating this TI XML, they were well aware of the problems of having angle brackets and Arabic in the same line. So what they did is that, as you look closer, tags and Arabic texts are kept on separate lines. That's the only way you can annotate Arabic text with TI XML and without losing your sanity. And I think you all had this experience when you try to when you type English in Arabic or French in Arabic in the same line, and you switch to Arabic and you try to put parentheses again or quotation marks or anything, any paired symbols. You can never really catch which one are you doing, the closing one or the opening one. And that becomes can become really uncomfortable. But in more specifically, these are kind of like a few differences that I would like to highlight. So XML definitely has a learning curve. Even just for basic annotation, you need to learn way more than you need to learn with the Markdown as we have it in OpenITI. And thanks to this simplicity of Markdown, we were able to train, to find people and train people on very quickly through online communication in order to bring them into text annotation within the corpus. Another issue is the size of the file, because the tags, the XML tags are usually much longer than those of Markdown. And again, as you remember, I mentioned you that the size of the corpus is already approaching 30 gigabytes. And if we keep it in XML, the size will become significantly larger. Another thing is that it's quite tricky to work with long text in TI XML. One of the reasons is, again, you always, for every element when you work with TI, you need to have an opening tag and you need to have a closing tag. And if you do it manually, it's a really tricky thing. In Markdown, that's just not a case at all, because you don't use closing tags per se. Again, XML is not really right to left friendly, and connected script, which Arabic uses, kind of creates another issue. And of course, because since the tags are more complicated, more complex, TI XML is more error prone than Markdown. Additionally, in order to take full advantage of TI XML, you need to learn a number of other things which are kind of under the scope of XML technologies. with Markdown, you benefit from learning regular expressions and Python or R for manipulating texts. But the thing is that with TI-XML, still, if you want to analyze text, you will still need to learn regular expressions, Python, and R. But with Markdown, if you're getting that far, you kind of already know that. So I think in general, the entry cost is much lower with Markdown than with TI-XML. So let's just kind of quickly go through the basics of Markdown here. So this screen here shows the metadata header. Each document in OpenITI Markdown starts with this kind of on line 1. See, can you see my cursor like this?
Yes, yes.
Okay, great. So this is a so-called magic value which activates the coloring schema. Then the second element that you can see is kind of a brownish going up until meta header end is a metadata header, and you can read clearly that the first one is the title, the second one is the author, the editor, and so on and so on. This, however, is not really machine readable metadata. It's what we could salvage from the text as they available online. But eventually we would like, of course, to convert this part into fully machine readable header. From line 21, that's the beginning of the text itself. So here, for instance, this is an example how a paragraph looks. It's the old version of Markdown, which is still what we have all our texts in. It begins with a hashtag, but then if the line continues the previous line, it starts with 2 tildes. We're now working on the revision of Markdown to simplify it more, because unfortunately, when I first created the first version of Markdown, my training, I was still in the beginning of my digital humanities training, and was trying to do too many different things together, and it could be simplified at the moment, and that's what we're working on. So essentially, the paragraphs, as they will be in the new version, it will be simply the empty line between 2 lines of text that will indicate the paragraph. We have text for poetry. Again, this is old version, and this is new version. It's essentially this kind of a divider for hemistics, or if you have only a single hemistic, you put it in the beginning of the line. The page tags look like this. In most cases, they automatically generated when we convert texts from whatever format we have them in the beginning into that. We use, for some purposes, we use milestones, which essentially simply divide text into equal 300 token long items, units. We use it in the GitHub project for tracing text reuse. And these are the headers of different levels, which again, the entire header is on a single line. It begins with 3 hashtags, and then the number of pipe characters determines the level of the header. So الطبقة الأولى is level 1. حوادث we have at level 2, and then سنة الأولى من الهجرة, that's level 3. Additionally, there are tags for logical units. And there's kind of like units for, in this case, you see units of biographies, which again, the tag is very simple. It's 3 hashtags and a $sign for man and $2 signs for woman, which after the tagging is manually completed, automatically converted into this kind of a more readable, longer tags. And that was essentially the core. That's the only tags that you need to know in order to do structural annotation. And again, most of the things that if we can, we try to do to automate them, to automate tagging. But then again, what constitutes Markdown is two parts. One is this standard core, which is very simple, very easy to learn, and the second one is this kind of analytical analytical patterns. It's sort of a freestyle where the tags are created for specific purposes, for specific research questions that you have. So here's an example of a biography annotated in a very detailed manner. We have green tags tagging dates and its year of death and year of birth. T tags, these are toponyms. P persons, individuals. CRC is sources. And additionally, we have morphological patterns. That's for splitting biography into elements, into morphological elements that constitute the biography. This part is not widely used. This is what I'm working on for my own research questions. But and that's one of the main points that I'm trying to kind of to sell people is that you can come up with your own set of tags that is suitable for a specific research question. So here's another example, which is administrative divisions in geographical literature. For example, what we have here, this is an excerpt from Al-Muqaddasi and Maqdisi, if you wish. What we have here is the description. So of a division. Jazirat al-Arab is divided into Hijaz, Yemen, Oman, and Hajar. And this is a kind of a tag or an annotation string that adds machine readability into this data. It's an inserted annotation which actually is not a part of a text. It's not in the text. It's an insertion that can be easily removed. But what it does is that it allows to very easily take this information and reformat it into data structures that can be analyzed. So for example, here, this is what was created from this. And the first here shows the first two levels of hierarchical data. So you see the names of provinces and kind of major provinces, and then subregions into which this province is divided. And here in this one, you can see the province of Iraq, as it's divided. It includes Samarra, Wasit, al-Basra, Kufa, Baghdad, Halwan, and then the settlements, which are part of that region within the province. And I can refer you to this article which discusses this kind of analysis of administrative divisions. And the main idea here was to generate these hierarchies from different geographical sources, so that we could compare how actually, for example, Al-Muqaddasi represents geography of the Islamic world compared to Al-Istakhri or any other or Ibn Hawkal or any other geographer that we have in our research tradition. The next thing here, again, also an analytical pattern specific, designed for specific research purpose, is the routes and distances. So here, again, the text comes from Muqaddasi, and this tag can be used in order to render descriptions of a route network in a natural language into the data that can actually be converted into route network, and you can do different kinds of modelings, visualizations, and analysis of this information. And last thing that I want to highlight here would be this the use of regular expressions, which can also be used very efficiently in order for this kind of analysis. And here, the regular expression here that looks kind of scary, but it's not really. It highlights individuals whose names are preceded with the transmission term, something like أخبرنا or عن حدثنا, and so on and so on. So a regular expression like this can be used for identifying clusters of texts visually, which have lots of hadith in them, lots of isnads in them. And in the same way, you can construct regular expressions to identify complex ideas or complex entities in the text as well. So now I would like to just give you an example of how the mARkdown is, how it works in action, and how you could do what I call algorithmic analysis. So the idea of algorithmic analysis comes from Stephen Ramsey's work called Reading Machines Toward an Algorithmic Criticism. And the idea is that we design very clear, specific procedures of how we deform the text into data and do the analysis. My own kind of definition of it, which I provide in the article cited below, which is it's in open access, so you can take a closer look. Algorithmic analysis is a step-by-step reduction of a text in a natural language to a machine-readable abstraction, which is then analyzed to discover shapes, relations, and structures. This is an iterative process of engagement with text, their abstractions, and their interpretations, where preliminary results excuse me, or later steps of the loop can suggest how one can improve earlier steps to attain better results. So in kind of in a graphical view, that will look like this. We start from the corpus. We create an abstraction, and again, I'll give an example of what abstraction is in just a moment. We do apply different digital methods to analyze it, and that part constitutes what Frank Marty calls distant reading. The results that we get from this digital analysis can be then subjected to traditional humanistic interpretation of what we call close reading. And this is a kind of a loop, the hermeneutic loop that keeps on going until we find satisfactory answers to our research questions. So let's take a look. Let's close a look at how specifically this is done. So here's an example of a biobibliographical record from Hadith Larifin of Ismail Pasha al-Baghdadi or Baghdadli, where he describes a number of individuals, almost 9,000, with very, very short information about them, when they died, and what they wrote. So, in mARkdown, so we have this data, and then we should think about what kind of research questions we want to ask of this text. The biography itself, as you can see, not particularly interesting, right? It's a very dry and short and quite boring. But if you think from it from a different perspective, again, we have almost 9,000 biographies, right? We theoretically know where these people lived, right? We have Qaryat Bashan, Naysabur, Mecca. We know who the person was. He was a muhaddith and faqih. We know when this person died, and we know what this person wrote. And imagine we have this data normalized, extracted from thousands and thousands of biographies. How many things we can actually learn from this? Again, if we were to proceed with TI-XML, what we would be doing is we would be tagging everything, all these items manually or maybe semi-automatically. That would take us a lot of time. But in using mARkdown, we can either do this kind of annotation with these simple tags, or we can actually take advantage of the structure that the biography has. So here, for example, if you look, there's this a word highlighted in black, Samnafa. And actually, if you stare enough at those biographies or those records that Ismail Pasha gives us, he actually uses a very, very small number of expressions that separate the biographical part from bibliographical part. And we can actually take advantage of that and split biographies automatically into into biographies and into bibliographies and treat them separately. So we do that, and we extract information, convert it into an abstract representation of this individual. And this abstract representation could look like this. So we have ID of a person, we have the year when the person died, we have the places which are associated with this individuals because they're mentioned in the biography, even though we're not specifying how exactly they are associated with this individual. And then we have a series of descriptive names, nisbas, that also add additional information on this individual. Plus, of course, we can, in the same way, we can extract the book titles and we can analyze them as well. What we do then is that we can use this, what I call interpretive schemas. So we can use onomastic interpretive schema that provides additional information on the descriptive names, and we can use toponymic data to collect additional, to provide additional information on the toponyms that are mentioned. So, for instance, with Naisabur and Mecca, we can get the region it belongs to, macro region it belongs to, and the coordinates if we want to map it. With these names, we can group them into larger categories, like let's say jurist and traditionist are describing an individual as belonging to a religious, a group of individuals with specific religious specialization and religious specializations more generally, while Harawi can be used actually through this one connected to toponymic geographical data and connected to the city of Herat. So we have this data, we can analyze it, and these are the kind of things that we can discover as we go along. So, for instance, we can get a chronological view of how many authors over the time presented in this biographical collection were contributing, were writing, and producing books. We can count the number of books, and through dates that are mentioned in the biographies of individuals, associate them with the periods and see how the rates of cultural production in the Islamic world. And you can see that there's an interesting kind of a hump in the early period, but then it largely just smoothly goes up. That's actually partially because we have several authors from the early period for whom a huge number of risalas is listed, and we have this kind of bump here. We can aggregate geographical data and look at how much different regions actually contributed to the Arabic written tradition, and largely it's Arabic written tradition, although there are a small percentage of books written in Turkish and Persian, and you can see the most important contributors to Islamic written tradition, which would be, from this view, would be Iraq, Iran, Anatolia, and Syria, and Egypt as well. But we can also look at each region in a chronological perspective to see when specifically each region was contributing to the Arabic written culture. So we have Iraq and Iran being extremely prominent in the early period, but then their prominence goes significantly down. We have Egypt and Syria at their height during the Mamluk period and later, and then early Ottoman period. Al-Andalus, while it's still flourishing, we have a significant contribution from it, and the Anatolia Rum comes in with the rise of the Ottoman Empire, and here's also India as a region. We can look at the geographical information and actually generate geographical networks from them. So, for example, this is would be kind of a geographical representation of that individual who we looked at, al-Bashani, because we have village of Bashan mentioned next to Herat. We have Naisabur and Mecca also mentioned in his biography. We can try to sort of travel, kind of model how the person might have traveled, but that's a little bit tricky. We can actually just simplify this representation and just do a straight line from one province, which would be Khorasan, to another, which will be Jazirat al-Arab. And again, we look at one individual, nothing particularly interesting, but if we aggregate this information and look at it sliced into periods, that's where we get interesting findings. So, for instance, up until 1200 CE, we have the most prominent areas are Iraq and Iran, and I kind of very crudely merged all the provinces of all the Iranian provinces here into Iran, and the strongest connections are between these two macro regions, these two macro provinces, if you will. From 1200 to 1300, we have this kind of a view when Al-Andalus get closely connected to Egypt, and we have strong connections between Iran, Iraq, and Syria. And that's actually the period when we have the beginning of Reconquista in Spain, and a lot of Andalusian scholars are moving to Maghreb and Egypt. And in Iran first, it was probably the change of the climate, which is Richard Bullitt is writing about, and only after that the Mongol invasion that pushes scholars from Iran and Iraq towards Syria and Egypt. In the next 2 centuries, 1400, 1500, we have a very strong Mamluk core during the Mamluk period, and followed by the rise of the Ottoman Empire, and in the last 1700, 1800, we have a very clear split between the Turco-Arabic world and Indo-Iranian world. So these are the kind of things that we can analyze, we can discover through the steps. And for the last things, I just this is still work in progress. I'm working on analyzing this collection, but I would like to also highlight that we can look at the genres, forms, and types of books that have been written in different periods. And for instance, here we have, this is if we look at the word Rad as it appears in titles, and it's very interesting. We have a huge number of these kind of refutations written in the period when the Islamic sciences, Islamic faith is still in the process of development, and it's partially, I think, was developing through the refutations of your opponents, and that's how we get this. We see this huge spike in refutations in the early period. We can look at types of text, and here's the graph of sharh, and it shows you that the sharh tradition, the form starts much earlier than, for instance, al-hashiyah, and goes on steadily through the period. But hashiyah as something that often actually written on the sharh starts much later, and there is a significant spike in this form. Mukhtasar, okay, this also we can trace this as a development of the form. Looking at different words also, which also occur in titles, we can see, for example, here's an interesting example of how the hadith sciences, and gharib is often also used in reference to hadith sciences, how they're prominent in the early period, but then these genres, these disciplines, they go down. Or, for example, fiqh, which actually picks up quite early and remains rather stable across the entire period, and the collections of fatawas pick up much later, and so we have what late Abbasid period, Zengid period, and keep quite that, yeah, probably say. And the last example that I have here is the references to Tib in title, as books on medicine, and to Tasawwuf. And again, you can see that they show different chronological patterns. Okay, so that would be almost the end, and let me finish with the takeaway. I know I think I'm a little bit over my time, but I'm finishing in just a few minutes. So, what the main thing the presentation I think was all about is that you need to reflect seriously about your research goal, on your research goals. If addition is your only goal, then proceed with TI. Although even here you can actually benefit from a Markdown approach in the sense that you first use simple Markdown tags which you come up on your own, and then they automatically convert them into complex XML tags. If data analysis is your goal, Markdown approach is definitely the way to go. If there is something else that you're interested in, then you need to think through. You need to consider what to do and how to do. For Markdown approach, you benefit to learn some Python, learn regular expressions, perhaps learn some R. So all the visualizations that I was showing were done in R. Places to start, you can use Programming Historian, which is a very, very good resource. I'm using it in teaching myself quite frequently, and they even have some of the lessons are in French, although only 14 out of 83 which are available in English and 46 which are available in Spanish. If more specifically on data analysis, I think DataCamp is quite an interesting resource, even though that's the one you kind of have to pay for, but they quite regularly offer really good deals, and you can get a subscription for an entire year for something like $50 to $100, something like this, and it could be quite a worthwhile resource for this. So just kind of a note on my own work in kind of teaching this stuff is that I am teaching DH courses here at University of Vienna, but I'm not placed in the Oriental Institute. So most of my students are historians who do modern European history. So my courses are tailored more toward them, less toward the analysis of Arabic sources. Occasionally, I teach workshops where I introduce these methods and walk students through that. And the last one I did was at Ghent University during the School of Mamluk Studies. And what's in the plans to work on is a DH handbook for Arabic and Islamic studies, where all these things that I was talking about will be described with examples of code and how to run it and things like that. And that would be all. Thank you very much.